Mom says strangers are dangerous. The little girl tilted her head and looked up at the man sitting alone on a weathered wooden bench overlooking Monterey Bay. Then why do you trust me? He asked with a faint smile. The girl thought for a second before answering. Because you look lonely like us. Ryan Carter was not expecting those words. He had spent most of the afternoon watching sailboats drift across the sparkling California water while families moved through the annual Monterey Harbor Festival. Children laughed near the carousel. Street musicians filled the air with soft melodies. The scent of fresh seafood and salt water drifted through the cool coastal breeze. It should have felt like a happy place. Yet for Ryan, places like this often reminded him of what was missing. 3 years had passed since he had lost his wife, but some days the silence still followed him everywhere. Emma, another young voice called. Wait for me. A second little girl came running toward the bench, nearly identical to the first. Same blonde hair, same bright blue eyes, same unstoppable energy. The first girl pointed proudly at Ryan. This is our new friend. Ryan laughed softly. I think friendship usually takes longer than 30 seconds. Not always, Emma replied. Her sister nodded in complete agreement. Definitely not always. Ryan noticed neither girl seemed worried. In fact, they appeared unusually comfortable talking to a complete stranger. Should you two be with your parents? He asked. The twins exchanged a glance. Mom is working. Again, the other added. And your dad? A brief silence followed. The girls looked away toward the ocean. We do not really see him, Emma said quietly. Ryan immediately regretted asking. I am sorry. It is okay, the second girl replied. Mom says we are doing great. Ryan smiled gently. I am sure you are. The girls climbed onto the bench beside him without invitation, as though they had known him for years. One pointed toward the water. The other pointed toward the Ferris wheel. Soon all three were talking about boats, ice cream, and the fastest rides at the festival. For the first time in weeks, Ryan found himself laughing. The sound surprised even him. The twins noticed immediately. See, Emma said proudly. You look happier now. Ryan shook his head in disbelief. You two have an answer for everything. That is what Mom says. Is your mom always right? Both girls answered at the exact same time. Absolutely not. Ryan laughed again. The afternoon sun reflected across the bay in golden ribbons of light. The festival crowd moved around them in a blur of color and sound. Then, suddenly, the twins stopped smiling. Their attention shifted toward someone in the distance. Ryan followed their gaze. Walking quickly through the crowd was a woman dressed in an elegant white outfit. Her chestnut hair moved with the ocean breeze. Even from a distance, her presence commanded attention. The twins jumped from the bench. Mom, they shouted. The woman froze when she saw her daughters standing beside a strange man. And in that single moment, everything changed. Madison Reed reached her daughters in seconds. The relief on her face appeared first, then concern, then something harder to read. She placed a protective hand on each girl's shoulder and looked directly at Ryan. Emma, Ava, what have I told you about talking to strangers? The twins exchanged guilty looks. Sorry, Mom. We were just sitting and talking. Madison's gaze remained fixed on Ryan. She was not rude. She was not hostile. But years of responsibility had taught her to be careful. Were they bothering you? Ryan stood from the bench and stepped back slightly, creating space. Not at all. They were keeping me company. Emma immediately pointed at him. He is nice. Ava nodded. Really nice. Girls, Madison said gently. Please. The twins fell silent. Ryan offered a polite smile. You do not have to worry. We were only talking about boats and carnival rides. Madison studied him for a moment. His clothes were simple. His work boots showed signs of long days. Nothing about him seemed threatening. Yet something about the situation made her uncomfortable. Successful people often lived in a world where motives had to be questioned. I appreciate that, she said carefully. But I prefer my daughters stay close to family. Ryan nodded. Understandable. There was no argument. No attempt to explain himself. No effort to gain approval. He simply accepted her concern. Somehow that caught Madison off guard. Most people reacted differently when challenged. Most people defended themselves. Ryan simply respected her position. The harbor breeze carried the sound of seagulls overhead. Festival lights were beginning to glow as the afternoon slowly shifted toward evening. Families wandered between food stands while musicians played near the waterfront. Around them, life continued normally. Yet Emma and Ava looked genuinely disappointed. Do we have to leave? Emma asked. Yes. Right now? Ava added. Yes. The girls looked at Ryan. Maybe we will see you again. Ryan smiled. Maybe. Madison glanced toward him. You live around here? Monterey. What do you do? I own a small auto repair shop. The answer seemed to surprise her. She was not sure why. Perhaps because he did not look like the type of person who spent his days fixing engines. There was something unusually calm about him. Something steady. Well, she said politely. Thank you for watching out for them. They did not need much watching. Emma grinned proudly. See? We told you. Madison sighed softly. Girls. For a brief moment, Ryan noticed something beneath her polished appearance. Fatigue. Not physical exhaustion. Something deeper. The kind that comes from carrying too much responsibility for too long. Before he could think further, she checked her watch. We need to go. The twins reluctantly started walking with her. After several steps, Ava suddenly turned around. Ryan. Yeah. You should smile more. Emma pointed at him. She is right. Ryan laughed despite himself. I will work on it. The girls smiled and continued toward the parking area. Madison followed beside them. Yet after several steps, she glanced back. Ryan was already sitting on the bench again, watching the ocean rather than the crowd. Completely alone. The sight lingered in her mind longer than she expected. Because for the first time all afternoon, she found herself wondering why a man who seemed so kind looked like he had nowhere else he wanted to be. Ryan remained on the bench for another hour after the festival crowd began thinning. The sky above Monterey Bay shifted from gold to deep shades of blue as evening settled across the coastline. Boats rocked gently in the harbor. Strings of lights reflected across the water. Families drifted home carrying souvenirs and tired children. Yet Ryan stayed where he was, watching the horizon. Some people spent money to find peace. Ryan found it in moments like this. Quiet. Simple. Honest. Eventually he stood and walked toward the parking lot. His old pickup truck waited beneath a row of cypress trees near the edge of the harbor. Before climbing inside, he glanced back one final time toward the festival. Then he drove home. Across town, Madison Reed sat alone in the back seat of a black SUV as it carried her and the twins toward their oceanfront estate. Emma and Ava had fallen asleep almost immediately. One leaned against the window. The other rested against a pillow. Madison looked at them and smiled softly. Then her thoughts returned to the man from the harbor. Strange. She could not remember the last time someone had spoken to her daughters without expecting something in return. Most people recognized her. Most people recognized her company. Some wanted business opportunities. Others wanted favors. Yet Ryan had simply walked away. No questions. No introductions. No attempt to impress her. The memory stayed with her longer than she expected. Everything okay, Ms. Reed? The driver asked. Yes. She looked out the window, just thinking. Back at the estate, the house felt as it always did. Beautiful. Impressive. Quiet. Too quiet. Staff members greeted her as she entered. A house manager updated her on the next day's schedule. 2 assistants had already sent reports requiring approval. Several messages waited on her phone. Success surrounded her from every direction. Yet when the twins disappeared upstairs and the staff returned to their duties, the silence returned. Madison walked into her office overlooking the ocean. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the moonlit Pacific stretching endlessly beyond the cliffs. She opened her laptop and began reviewing documents. 10 minutes later, her concentration broke. Then something unexpected happened. A small knock sounded on the door. Come in. Emma and Ava entered wearing matching pajamas. We cannot sleep. Madison glanced at the clock. You have school tomorrow. We know. Then why are you awake? The twins exchanged a look. Madison immediately became suspicious. That look usually meant trouble. What is it? She asked. Emma stepped forward first. Do you think Ryan is lonely? Madison blinked. What? Ava climbed onto a chair. The man from the festival. Why are we talking about him? Because he looked sad. Madison leaned back slowly. You met him for 20 minutes. 32 minutes, Emma corrected. Approximately, Ava added. Madison fought a smile. That is still not very long. Emma shrugged. It was enough. The room grew quiet. Madison looked at her daughters. Children often notice things adults missed. Why do you think he was lonely? She asked. Ava answered first. Because he looked at the ocean the same way you do. The words landed harder than Madison expected. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The moonlight reflected softly across the office windows. Somewhere downstairs, a grandfather clock marked the passing hour. Then Emma smiled. Maybe he needs friends. Madison shook her head. Life is not that simple. But even as she said it, she found herself remembering a man sitting alone on a bench by the water, watching the horizon as though he was waiting for something he had not yet found. 3 days passed before Madison thought about the man from the harbor again. At least that was what she told herself. In reality, his face surfaced more often than she cared to admit. It appeared during long meetings, during quiet drives home, during those rare moments when the house finally became still. Meanwhile, Ryan returned to the routine that had carried him through the past several years. Every morning, he opened Carter Auto Repair at 7 o'clock sharp. Every evening, he locked the doors after the last customer left. Engines came and went. Tires were replaced. Oil was changed. Life moved forward one ordinary day at a time. The small garage sat just outside downtown Monterey. The building was not impressive, but it was honest. Customers trusted Ryan because he never sold repairs people did not need. In a world that often rewarded shortcuts, he still believed character mattered. Late Friday afternoon, Ryan was replacing a water pump when he heard laughter outside the shop. He smiled immediately. The sound felt familiar. A second later, the front door opened. Emma and Ava stepped inside carrying backpacks nearly as large as themselves. "Surprise!" they shouted. Ryan nearly dropped his wrench. "What are you two doing here?" The twins grinned proudly. "We found you." "That is not an answer." "It took us 20 minutes. And one internet search," Ava added. Ryan set down his tools and crouched to their level. "Please tell me your mother knows where you are." The twins suddenly became very interested in the floor. Ryan sighed. "That is what I thought." Outside, the afternoon sun painted long shadows across the parking lot. Inside the garage, the smell of motor oil mixed with the sound of an old radio playing softly in the corner. Emma wandered toward a workbench covered with tools. Ava examined a classic pickup truck waiting for restoration. Their curiosity filled every corner of the room. "This place is amazing," Emma said. "It is mostly grease and paperwork." "Still amazing," Ava replied. Ryan could not help smiling. For the next 30 minutes, the girls followed him everywhere. They handed him tools, asked endless questions, shared stories about school. The garage felt strangely brighter with them there. Then a black luxury SUV pulled into the parking lot. Ryan noticed it through the open bay door. So did the twins. "Oh," Emma whispered. The passenger door opened. Madison stepped out wearing a white business suit and an expression that immediately told Ryan she was not having a good afternoon. She walked toward the garage with quick, determined steps. "Emma." "Ava." The twins froze. "Hi, Mom." Madison looked from her daughters to Ryan, then around the garage, then back to her daughters. "Would either of you like to explain how you got here?" Silence. "We took the shuttle. Then we walked." "Girls." The word carried enough authority to stop both explanations immediately. Ryan stood and removed his work gloves. For what it is worth, they arrived safely. Madison exhaled slowly. "I am sorry." Ryan looked surprised. "For what?" "For this." She gestured toward the twins. "Apparently, they have decided you are part of their lives now." For the first time since entering the garage, Ryan noticed something unexpected in her expression. She was embarrassed. Not angry. Not suspicious. Just tired. And standing there beneath the afternoon sunlight, surrounded by tools and unfinished projects, Madison Reed suddenly looked far less like a powerful CEO and much more like a mother trying her best to keep up with two determined little girls. Madison intended to leave immediately. That had been the plan the moment she arrived. Pick up the twins. Apologize to Ryan. Return home. Yet somehow 30 minutes later, she was still standing inside the garage while Emma and Ava sat on overturned buckets eating sandwiches Ryan had quietly prepared from a small refrigerator in the corner. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the open bay door, painting golden lines across the concrete floor. Engines, toolboxes, and unfinished projects surrounded them. It was not a place Madison would normally spend time. Yet there was something strangely comforting about it. "You keep food here?" she asked. Ryan nodded. "Most days I work through lunch." "That sounds healthy." "It is not." Madison laughed softly before she could stop herself. Ryan smiled. The twins immediately noticed. "There it is," Emma announced. "What?" Madison asked. "Your real smile." Ava pointed at her mother. "We have not seen that one all week." Madison shook her head. I am beginning to think the two of you are running some kind of social experiment. Maybe, Emma replied. Definitely, Ava added. Ryan laughed quietly and returned to organizing tools on a nearby workbench. As Madison looked around the garage, her attention landed on a framed photograph hanging beside a shelf of spare parts. The image showed Ryan standing beside a woman with bright eyes and a warm smile. Both held a small puppy between them. The photograph looked old, but not forgotten. Something about the way it had been placed suggested it mattered deeply. Madison's expression softened. Your wife. Ryan followed her gaze. For a moment he said nothing. Then he nodded. Her name was Hannah. The twins became unusually quiet. Even Emma and Ava seemed to sense the importance of the moment. Madison walked a little closer to the photograph. She looks kind. She was. Ryan's voice remained calm, but there was history inside it. Years of memories. Years of loss. The afternoon sounds of traffic drifted faintly from the street outside. Somewhere in the garage, an old fan hummed steadily. I am sorry, Madison said. Ryan looked at the picture for a second before returning to his work. Thank you. No dramatic speech followed. No long explanation. Just two simple words. Somehow they carried more weight than an entire conversation. Madison understood that kind of grief. Not the same grief, but the kind that changes the shape of your life and quietly stays with you. How long? She asked. 3 years. Madison nodded slowly. That is not very long. Ryan smiled faintly. Some days it feels like yesterday. Silence settled between them. Not awkward. Not uncomfortable. Honest. Emma eventually broke it. Mom works all the time. Emma, Madison warned gently. What? It is true. Ava nodded. Very true. Ryan looked toward Madison, but said nothing. There was no judgment in his eyes. Only understanding. And somehow that was worse. Because for the first time in a long while, Madison found herself standing in front of someone who seemed to understand loneliness without needing it explained. As the sunlight faded beyond the garage doors and the twins continued laughing nearby, both Ryan and Madison realized something unexpected. Beneath their very different lives, they had been carrying the same quiet emptiness all along. The following Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and a cool ocean breeze drifting across Monterey. Ryan expected an ordinary day at the garage. Instead, he found Emma and Ava waiting outside before he even unlocked the front door. Good morning, Emma announced. We have a problem. Ryan laughed. That sounds serious. It is, Ava agreed. Very serious. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Should I be worried? The twins exchanged a glance. Then Emma carefully pulled a small wooden music box from her backpack. The lid hung crookedly from one side. A tiny crack ran across the painted surface. It broke, she said quietly. Ryan immediately noticed the change in her voice. Gone was the usual confidence. What happened? I dropped it. Emma looked down. By accident. Ava gently touched her sister's shoulder. She cried. Ryan accepted the music box and examined it carefully. The worn paint and delicate carvings suggested it had been treasured for years. Is it important? He asked. The twins nodded together. Grandma gave it to us, Ava said, before she passed away. Ryan's expression softened. Then we should definitely try to save it. Relief immediately appeared on both faces. He carried the music box inside and placed it on a workbench beneath a bright lamp. The twins watched every movement as though they were observing surgery. Ryan opened the damaged lid and inspected the mechanism. Good news. Really? Emma asked. It looks reparable. Both girls cheered. The next hour passed slowly. Ryan worked with careful hands while explaining each step. He showed them how tiny gears connected together. He demonstrated why patience mattered. He let them help clean dust from the inside of the box. Outside, sunlight filled the garage. Inside, laughter echoed between shelves lined with tools and spare parts. Around noon, another familiar vehicle entered the parking lot. Madison stepped out carrying her phone in one hand and a folder of documents in the other. She looked tired, not exhausted, just stretched too thin. The moment she entered the garage, she found both daughters sitting beside Ryan's workbench completely focused on the music box. There you are, she said. Do you have any idea how many messages I received from your school asking where you went? The twins looked guilty. Sorry, Mom. Again. Madison sighed before turning toward Ryan. I apologize. You do that a lot, Ryan said with a smile. To her surprise, Madison laughed. A real laugh. Not the polite version she used in boardrooms. The genuine one. Then her attention shifted to the music box. You fixed it. Almost. Ryan carefully turned a tiny key. A gentle melody filled the garage. The twins stared in amazement. Emma's eyes immediately filled with tears. It works. Yes, Ryan said quietly. It works. Madison watched her daughters' faces as the music played. The joy in their expressions was impossible to miss. Then she looked at Ryan. He had spent nearly 2 hours repairing something that held no value on paper. No profit. No business opportunity. No advantage. Just a broken keepsake that mattered to 2 little girls. And in that moment, Madison realized something money had never been able to buy. Time. Attention. Presence. The very things her daughters seemed to find so naturally whenever they were around him. The music box remained on the workbench long after its melody faded. Emma and Ava carried it carefully as though it were made of glass and memories. Madison watched them from across the garage. Something about the scene stayed with her. The girls were smiling more than they had in weeks, maybe months. And the reason had nothing to do with expensive vacations, private schools, or the countless opportunities she worked so hard to provide. It was a repaired music box and a man who had taken the time to listen. Later that afternoon, Ryan closed the garage early. Business had been slow, and the twins showed no signs of wanting to leave. Together, they walked toward a small diner overlooking the marina. The place was simple. Red booths, large windows, fresh coffee, the kind of restaurant where locals knew one another by name. Emma and Ava immediately claimed a booth by the window. Madison hesitated. We do not want to interrupt your day. Ryan smiled. You already interrupted my day. The twins looked horrified. Then Ryan laughed. I am kidding. Relief flooded both faces. The waitress arrived with menus. Outside, sailboats drifted through the harbor beneath a sky painted with shades of gold and blue. Inside, conversation came easily. Easier than Madison expected. Ryan spoke about growing up in Monterey, about learning auto repair from his father, about Hannah and their dream of opening the garage together. Madison found herself sharing stories too. Stories she rarely told anyone. Not because they were secret, because nobody ever asked. Do you enjoy being a CEO? Ryan asked. Madison considered the question. Sometimes. That does not sound convincing. It is rewarding. She stared out the window. But rewarding and fulfilling are not always the same thing. Ryan nodded. He understood. The twins were coloring on paper placemats when Ava suddenly looked up. Can I ask something? Madison immediately became cautious. That depends. Why do we laugh more here than at home? The question landed like a pebble dropped into still water. No one spoke. Emma lowered her crayon. Ryan looked toward the harbor. Madison froze completely. Ava, she said gently. What? That is a complicated question. Not really. Ava shrugged. We just laugh more here. Silence settled over the table. The kind of silence that appears when a child accidentally tells the truth everyone else has been avoiding. Outside, sunlight shimmered across the water. Inside, Madison stared at her untouched coffee. She wanted to answer. She wanted to explain deadlines, investors, responsibilities, and the pressure of carrying an entire company on her shoulders. Yet none of those explanations sounded meaningful when compared to the simple honesty of her daughter's question. Ryan did not rescue her from the moment. He did not change the subject. He simply sat quietly, offering the one thing she seemed to need most. Grace. After several long seconds, Madison reached across the table and took both girls' hands. Her voice was soft when she finally spoke. I am trying. Emma squeezed her hand. Ava squeezed the other. And for the first time in a very long while, Madison wondered if success had distracted her from the very people she had worked so hard to protect. The drive back from the marina was unusually quiet. Emma and Ava eventually fell asleep in the back seat, their heads resting against opposite windows as the lights of Monterey drifted past. Madison drove alone with her thoughts. Ava's question remained with her long after the conversation ended. Why do we laugh more here than at home? The words followed her into the driveway, through the front doors of the estate, and into the silence that waited inside. Across town, Ryan stood outside his garage after locking up for the night. The coastal air felt cool against his face. He could still hear the twins laughing in his memory. For the first time in a long while, the evening did not feel quite so empty. Yet happiness carried its own complications. He knew better than most that becoming attached to people could be dangerous when life had already taught you how quickly things could change. The following week passed faster than expected. Madison buried herself in meetings. Investors arrived from San Francisco. Contracts demanded attention. Presentations filled entire afternoons. Yet despite her schedule, she found herself checking her phone whenever Emma and Ava mentioned Ryan. The girls talked about him constantly. They talked about the garage. They talked about the music box. They talked about the diner. And every story seemed to contain one thing she could not ignore: joy. Late Thursday evening, after the twins had gone to bed, Madison stood alone on the terrace overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The waves rolled against the cliffs below. Moonlight stretched across the water in silver ribbons. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Emma standing in the doorway wrapped in a blanket. "You should be asleep," Madison said softly. Emma shrugged. Could not sleep. She walked beside her mother and looked out toward the ocean. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Emma asked a question. "Do you miss being happy?" Madison blinked. "What do you mean?" "Before work got so busy." The question carried no accusation, only curiosity. Madison looked toward the horizon. "Sometimes." Emma nodded as though she already knew the answer. "Ryan misses someone too." Madison glanced at her daughter. "Did he tell you that?" "Not exactly." Emma smiled gently. "You can tell." The wind moved softly through the night air. Somewhere below, waves broke against the shoreline. "Mom?" Emma asked. "Yes. I think you and Ryan are sad for different reasons." Madison laughed quietly. "That is a very big observation for an 8-year-old. Emma smiled. "Maybe." Then her expression became serious again. "But I think you both pretend you are okay because you do not want anyone else to worry." The words settled over the terrace. Madison felt something tighten in her chest. Children saw the world differently. Simpler, clearer, sometimes more honestly than adults. The next afternoon, Ryan received an unexpected visitor at the garage. Madison stepped through the open bay door alone. No assistants. No phone calls. No twins. Just her. Ryan looked up from the engine he was repairing. "Everything okay?" Madison smiled faintly. "I think so." The afternoon sunlight streamed through the garage windows as they stood facing each other in the quiet. For the first time since they met, there were no distractions. No crowds. No children. No interruptions. Just two people carrying different wounds who had finally stopped pretending they did not exist. Madison stood near the open bay door while afternoon sunlight spilled across the garage floor. For a moment, neither she nor Ryan spoke. The familiar sounds of the repair shop filled the silence. A radio played softly somewhere in the background. Tools rested neatly along the workbench. Outside, traffic moved slowly through the streets of Monterey. Everything felt ordinary, yet somehow the moment felt important. "I owe you an apology," Madison finally said. Ryan looked up from the engine. "For what?" "For assuming I knew who you were." Ryan smiled faintly. "Most people do that." "And does it bother you?" He considered the question. "Not anymore." Madison laughed softly. "You have an answer for everything." "Not even close." The conversation came easily after that. Easier than either expected. They spoke about family. About responsibility. About the strange ways life changes plans without asking permission. Ryan shared stories about Hannah. Not dramatic stories. Small ones. The way she sang while cooking. The way she always ordered dessert first. The way she believed people deserved second chances. Madison listened quietly. Then, for the first time, she spoke honestly about her own fears. Not as a CEO, not as a public figure, simply as a mother. "I spent so many years building something successful," she admitted. "I kept telling myself it was for the girls." Ryan nodded. "And now?" Madison looked down. "Now I wonder if they would rather have had more of me and less of everything else." The words lingered between them. Ryan did not rush to answer. He simply leaned against the workbench and thought. Children do not remember every gift. Madison looked at him. "What do they remember?" Ryan smiled gently. "Who showed up?" Silence followed. Outside, the afternoon sun slowly drifted toward the horizon. Inside, something quietly shifted. Not romance. Not a dramatic revelation. Something simpler. Understanding. Later that evening, Madison invited Ryan and his teenage nephew Caleb, who occasionally helped at the garage, along with Emma and Ava, to a small restaurant overlooking the ocean. The place sat near the edge of the marina where waves rolled softly beneath a glowing sunset. There were no executives, no assistants, no meetings waiting afterward. Just people sharing a table. The twins talked enough for everyone. They laughed about school. They laughed about the music box. They laughed about the day they secretly searched for Ryan's garage. Even Madison laughed until tears formed in her eyes. At one point, Emma looked around the table and smiled. This feels nice. Nobody disagreed. The sky turned orange, then pink, then deep shades of blue. Boats drifted quietly in the harbor. Lights appeared one by one along the waterfront. Ryan looked around the table and felt something unfamiliar. Peace. Not because the past had disappeared, not because grief had vanished, but because life had finally made room for joy again. As dinner came to an end, Emma pointed toward the ocean. Look! Everyone turned. The final rays of sunlight stretched across the water like a path of gold leading toward the horizon. For several moments, nobody spoke. The scene did not need words. Madison glanced toward Ryan. Ryan glanced toward Madison. Neither promised anything. Neither needed to. Some stories begin with grand gestures. Others begin with simple moments shared between people who understand each other. As the waves rolled against the shore and the twins continued smiling between them, both realized that the thing they had been missing was never success, money, or achievement. It was belonging. And for the first time in years, they no longer felt alone.